And our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, August 1st, here in South Korea. Torturous temperatures of the scorching summer continue to suffocate the country, with health authorities here renewing their calls for caution, especially among the elderly, with regard to outdoor activities. Meanwhile, President Yoon Suk-yeol, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and US President Joe Biden are poised to meet at the US presidential retreat of Camp David on August 18th to address a host of mutual interests. Korea posts a trade surplus of $1.63 billion in July as the country's imports fall further than its exports for the second month in a row. Health authorities are calling on the public, especially the elderly here, to refrain from outdoor activities as the blistering summer heat looks to persist throughout this week. Our Lee Seung-jae starts us off.
The intense heat wave here in South Korea has continued for more than a week, and now this capital Seoul is forecast to reach a daytime high of 35 degrees Celsius on Tuesday, marking the highest temperature this summer. Daejeon is expected to reach 36 degrees Celsius, with Hwasun County in Jeollanam-do Province forecast to hit 37 degrees. While rain is expected to fall in some parts of the country, it won't be enough to quell the intense heat wave. And the prolonged heat wave has also turned deadly, as over a dozen people have died due to heat-related illness this summer. According to the official tally from the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there have been at least 1,100 heat-related illness cases this year, and at least 13 lives being lost this summer. The majority of those that have lost their lives due to the heat have been elderly farmers. It can be especially dangerous for farmers working inside greenhouses, as temperatures inside can get far higher than outside. For instance, with an outdoor temperature of 30 degrees Celsius, the temperature inside a greenhouse can reach 44 degrees. At the peak of the afternoon, with the outdoor temperature at 34 degrees, the reading inside the greenhouse can spike to 52 degrees. Experts warn that the elderly, who are slow to recognize symptoms, and those with underlying cardiovascular and cerebrovascular diseases may be particularly at risk and should refrain from outdoor work as much as possible between 12 noon and 5 p.m. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And President Yoon Suk-yeol has vowed efforts to better protect public interests. Chairing a cabinet meeting earlier on this Tuesday, President Yoon pledged tangible financial support, particularly for farmers and small businesses hard hit by the torrential downpours. He also called for government inspections of underground parking lots, whose structures appear to have been compromised in the process of construction. And in response to the recent rallies by teachers, the president reiterated the need for a fresh framework of guidelines that safeguard the rights of the faculty as well as those of the student body within the learning environment to be effective from the second half of the school year. South Korea's top diplomat to the US has made special note of the venue of the upcoming trilateral talks among leaders of Seoul, Washington and Tokyo later this month. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-jae covers his comments and more.
The upcoming trilateral summit between the leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan, set to take place on August 18th, will be an opportunity to further strengthen cooperation between the three countries. That's according to South Korea's ambassador to the U.S., Cho Hyun-dong, who noted that the upcoming event will be the first summit to be held at Camp David since President Joe Biden took office. Speaking to reporters in Washington on Monday local time, he explained that the venue for the summit underscores the emphasis U.S. President Joe Biden places on the trilateral cooperation.
This shows how much President Biden thinks of his relationship with our presidents, as well as the relations between South Korea and the US, and the trilateral relations between South Korea, the US, and Japan.
If the summit takes place, it will not only be the first visit to Camp David, the presidential country retreat, by a foreign leader since Biden took office, but it will also be the first since 2015, when former U.S. President Barack Obama was in office. The ambassador added that Seoul has been playing a leading role in developing the trilateral partnership, something that was made possible because of improved relations with Japan.
I believe improved relations between South Korea and Japan is what took the cooperation between South Korea, the US and Japan to a new level.
Another senior official also noted that officials from the three countries are discussing whether or not to hold a trilateral summit on a regular basis from now on, with the leaders will make the final decision. The official also added that the issue of Japan's plan to release wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear power plant is not on the agenda for the upcoming summit. 배은지, Arirang News.
And the U.S. has warned of additional sanctions against North Korea and Russia should the two countries be trading weapons. Now, this is according to U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller on Monday in response to questions about the Russian defense minister's visit to Pyongyang last week to mark the 70th anniversary of the Korean armistice agreement. While refraining from details, Miller claimed Washington would not hesitate in imposing further sanctions if deemed necessary. Now, these remarks also follow reports of Ukraine having intercepted North Korean rockets from a ship that was headed to Russia. Findings for July show Korea's trade balance in the black for the second month in a row as imports plunged deeper than exports. Our trade correspondent Moon Hae-ryun reports.
South Korea's trade balance was in the black for the second straight month last month on the back of rising auto exports and falling raw material prices. According to data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Tuesday, the country's trade balance was over $1.6 billion in July, with exports coming to just over $50 billion and imports at over $48 billion. This surplus was largely due to import prices, which fell by more than 25% compared to the same month the year before. Prices for oil, gas and energy fell by over 46% on-year across all three sectors, leading to the sharp decline in import prices. However, outbound shipments from South Korea fell by over 16% on-year. The ministry attributed the decline to the base effect due to record-high exports last July and the continued slump in semiconductor exports. Chip exports have been on a consecutive on-year decline for the past 12 months, with July's outbound shipments of semiconductors falling by 34% compared to last year. Falling oil prices have also led to the decline in the value of various petroleum products, which also contributed to the overall decrease in total export value. Meanwhile, exports across the auto industry, mechanical and household electronic goods sectors rose. Auto exports rose by 15% on-year on the back of rising popularity of eco-friendly vehicles around the world and recorded the highest total value for the month of July. This is the 13th month in a row that auto exports have seen an on-year rise. Outbound shipments of materials to the United States for use in batteries for electric vehicles also rose significantly in line with the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. In addition to South Korea's active response to the IRA and Chips and Science Act, its return to Japan's trade whitelist as of last month is expected to have a positive impact on the country's trade balance in the near future. The government also highlighted its high-level cooperation with major Middle Eastern countries such as the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia as part of its trade policies. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
U.S. crude oil futures posted their highest on-month price surge in July since January 2022. According to Reuters on Monday local time, U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude soared some 16% last month, while Brent crude gained 14%. The rise comes amid concerns over global supplies in light of reduced output by OPEC+. Pundits are also linking the trend to growing expectations for a global economic recovery. In other news, Pope Francis has urged Russia to restore the Black Sea grain initiative amid fresh fears over global food security as wheat prices continue to rise. Our Yoon has more on these remarks and the broader repercussions of Russia's inaction.
Pope Francis on Sunday called for prayers for Russia to restore the grain shipments from Ukraine through the Black Sea initiative so that millions who suffer from hunger can be saved. Speaking after his weekly Angelus prayer at the Vatican, he said the destruction of the grain deal is a great offense against God because grain is his gift to feed humanity.
Let us not cease to pray for beleaguered Ukraine, where war is destroying everything, even grain. This is a great offense against God, because grain is his gift to feed humanity. I appeal to my brothers, the authorities of the Russian Federation, that the Black Sea Initiative may be restored and grain may be transported safely.
The Black Sea Grain Initiative that ensures Ukrainian grain can travel into international waters of the Black Sea, avoiding mined areas on land, was negotiated in July 2022 between Turkey, the UN, and Russia. Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe, and the deal helped stave off worsening of global hunger and prevented a surge in food prices worldwide. The deal also allowed Ukraine to export grain from its seaports despite the ongoing war. But Russia decided to suspend the deal on July 17th, claiming that the part of the deal allowing Russian agricultural exports was being negatively affected by Western sanctions. On Monday, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba held talks with his Croatian counterpart to discuss the possibility of using Croatian ports on the Danube and the Adriatic Sea for the export of Ukrainian grain. Restoring a route for Ukraine's grain exports is key to keeping down food prices worldwide and preventing millions from suffering hunger. The United Nations reported that supplies transported under the Black Sea Grain Initiative by the World Food Programme directly supported people in need, and that as of July 2023, the WFP procured 80% of its global wheat grain from Ukraine under the initiative. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials said that on Monday, Russian ballistic missiles slammed into an apartment complex and a university building in President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown, killing 6 people and wounding 75 others as the blasts trapped residents beneath rubble. 이은진, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Pakistan is reeling from the aftermath of a brutal bomb blast this past Sunday that took more than 50 lives and injured some 200 as an Afghan branch of the militant group Islamic State claims responsibility. Our Arirang has the latest.
At least 54 people are dead in the town of Bijor in northwestern Pakistan after a suicide bombing targeted a pro-Taliban party's election rally on Sunday. The death toll included at least 5 children and left around 200 wounded. Islamic State in Khorasan province on Monday local time claimed in a statement that they were responsible for the bombing.
I don't know what the cause was, but there was a sudden blast, and within moments, dozens of people were lying dead and injured on the ground.
When we reached the convention and heard speeches being delivered from the stage, we were standing to welcome our leaders when suddenly a blast occurred, and then we were not aware of ourselves.
Sunday's bombing was among the worst in northwestern Pakistan in the last decade. Around 400 members of the Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam Party, a key government coalition partner headed by hardline politician Fazlur Rahman, were waiting for speeches to begin when a bomber detonated an explosive vest near the stage. Rahman appears to have not attended the rally. Abdul Rashid, one of the party's senior leaders, said the bombing was aimed at weakening the party, but that, quote, such attacks cannot deter our resolve. Police had suggested in their initial investigation that Islamic State in Khorasan province was a suspect. The Pakistani Taliban, which some analysts have suggested as possible suspects, distanced itself from the attack. The country's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif called Rahman to express his condolences and made assurances that those who led the attack would be punished. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres also strongly condemned the suicide bombing.
The Secretary General extends his heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims and wishes a prompt recovery to those injured. He calls on the Pakistani authorities to bring those responsible to justice.
The UN chief also denounced all instances of terrorism and attacks against civilians, adding that he stands in solidarity with the government and the people of Pakistan in combating the scourge. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
And on a light note now, the world's largest youth campaign, the World Scout Jamboree, is taking place here in Korea at Saemangeum, Jeollabuk-do Province. Some 43,000 teenagers from 158 countries are gathering for the event. Running from the 1st to the 12th of August, the camp has a diverse schedule of programs including global food tastings, temple stay experiences and a K-pop concert. It's the second time Korea is hosting this event, which is held every 4 years to promote friendship through youth cultural interactions. The event this time around also coincides with the 100th anniversary of the Korea Scout Association. The production of plant-based meat alternatives here in Korea requires imported ingredients, but now that is no longer necessary thanks to technology developed by researchers here. Our Chong explains.
Plant-based meat substitutes are plant-based proteins that are similar in taste and texture to actual meat. Simply put, they are meat-free meat dishes. Such alternatives have started to attract consumer attention by not only imitating meat, but also embodying the flavor and texture of the real thing. According to Euromonitor, a market research company, the South Korean meat substitute market was worth 8 billion won in 2019, but has been growing steadily and surpassed 20 billion won, or roughly $15 million last year. Soy protein isolate from soybeans is a key ingredient in making meat substitutes, but until now this could not be produced in South Korea, so manufacturers had to rely on imports. A South Korean research team, however, has recently developed a technology that may replace soy protein isolate by mixing starch, gluten, and flour made from a South Korean soybean variety called miso.
Meat substitutes are usually made from soy protein isolate. This study is significant as we discovered we can make meat alternatives with South Korean soybeans that haven't gone through the protein separation process.
The research team proved through testing that using local materials produces a softer texture than when using imported soy protein isolate. GMOs are also not detected in South Korean soybeans, increasing consumer safety.
Through this research, we expect domestic soybeans to be used in a variety of processed food ingredients that will greatly contribute to improving the self-sufficiency rate of South Korean soybeans.
The Rural Development Administration plans to continue developing soybean varieties suitable for meat alternatives and introduce new technology to the field. 정은주, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Beijing, at least 2 people have died and over 30,000 have been evacuated amid major flooding and landslides in the capital and other parts of northern China. Torrential downpours from Storm Doksuri over the weekend caused Beijing to receive the equivalent of July's annual rainfall in just 3 days. The death toll is expected to rise and the city has issued a red alert, the most severe weather warning in its 4-tier system. Subways have been closed, flights delayed, and tourist attractions, including the Forbidden City, are off limits. Businesses have also been ordered to allow employees to work from home. Now, coup leaders in Niger have accused France on Monday of planning a military intervention to reinstate the ousted president, Mohamed Bazoum. They said Niger's fallen government had authorized the country's former colonial ruler to carry out strikes to free Bazoum. France has not confirmed or denied the allegation, instead saying that its focus is to guarantee the security of its nationals. This comes after the first photo of Bazoum since the coup was released. In it, the ousted leader is seen meeting with Chad's president for in-depth talks to find a peaceful resolution. Bazoum has been confined to the presidential palace since Wednesday, after his presidential guard forcefully took power. And finally, actor and comedian Paul Rubens, best known for his character Pee Wee Herman, has died at the age of 70. According to his publicist, Rubens died on Sunday following a 6-year battle with cancer. Rubens created and portrayed the popular 1980s character Pee Wee Herman, recognizable in a tight-fitting grey suit, a red bow tie, and an iconic laugh. He appeared in several films, including the 1985 flick Pee-wee's Big Adventure and the Emmy Award-winning TV series Pee-wee's Playhouse. But the character was put aside for over 2 decades after Rubens was arrested for indecent exposure in 1991. Although the charges were dropped, the incident ruined his reputation. Rubens eventually brought Pee-wee back in 2010 for a Broadway show, and in 2016 for a Netflix movie. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. A wave of deep, blasting heat continues to sweep Korea, with temperatures to rise a bit higher than Monday, with most parts under a heat wave warning. Those of us in the capital area should have a strong umbrella handy. It looks like it will rain heavily this afternoon, with up to 60 millimeters expected. The rest of the southern regions are under strong sunshine. Highs in most parts are hovering around 35 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Take care during this massive heat wave. Now, we're looking at frequent passing rain this week, while the intense heat stays with us through next week. Now, giving you an update on the sixth typhoon of the season, Kanun. Right now, the typhoon is passing through the coast on the southeast of Okinawa, Japan. It could gradually change its course northeastward by the end of the week, possibly heading towards the Korean peninsula. So please keep updated with the latest weather information. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That ends Tuesday's afternoon newscast, but do stay with us for our panel session coming up next. Thank you for now.
South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduced a Korean New Year. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
COVID-19 cases have been spiking this summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and while they appear far less severe than the infections over the past few summers, health pundits are calling for caution and good personal hygiene. So what are the latest COVID-19 tallies telling us? How are health experts explaining the recent rebound? And is COVID-19 becoming a seasonal illness? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today, we touch upon the recent resurgence in COVID-19 cases here in the country, as well as over in the US. For more on this, I have Dr. Alice Tan at Miss Mary Women's Hospital, live on the line, who is joining us virtually from Seattle today. Right, Dr. Tan?
Yes, I am.
It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Professor Monica Gandhi at the University of California, San Francisco with us. Professor Gandhi, it's good to have you with us as well.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Tan, let's begin with details about the latest surge in COVID-19 cases here in Korea. What are the related tallies telling us?
Right, so the current situation with COVID in South Korea seems to be very similar to the surge that happened last May, so about 2 months ago. But we do seem to be on track to surpass the number of cases that were seen in May. So from last week's KDCA report, there was a 50% week-on-week increase in new cases in the age 10 to 19 bracket. So that's students mostly. And then from this week's KDCA report, they showed a 44% week-on-week increase in new cases in the age bracket for people age 60 and above. Fortunately, there has not been a spike in deaths due to COVID during the last month. That is certainly good news, but ICUs are starting to fill up. And the concern is because there are more people who are elderly, who are getting sick with COVID. For the last 2 weeks, the total number of cases who are age 60 and above exceeded 100,000. There is the risk that there may be more severely ill and potentially fatal cases of COVID in the weeks to come. That's certainly what happened last January. That is the last time that we had a big surge in cases in this elderly population. And so we want to do everything we can to prepare for that possibility. It doesn't seem like there's a deficiency of ICU rooms or healthcare capacity right now. And the KDCA is making preparations for a surge in need for ICU care. But overall, because healthcare capacity does seem to be poised to deal with the surge, the overall risk for COVID-19 for the entire society is still low.
Right, I see. Professor Gandhi, I understand a similar scenario of resurgence is being witnessed there in the U.S. as well. How severe is the surge there?
So it's not if you divide it in terms of severe disease versus cases. And I think we're just going to have to live with the fact that COVID-19 is not an eradicable infection, very unfortunately. Just the simple way to put it is it's in animals, even there's lots of other reasons, but because of that, we'll never eradicate COVID. So we're going to see, depending on if there's a new subvariant, in this case, we have XBB 1.16 in this country, and now we have the rise of something called EB5. These are all within the Omicron family. They can be more transmissible, and we'll see more cases. But what we're not seeing is a rise in severe disease, and that's really hospitalization and deaths. Our overall rate of immunity in the population is very high. There was a CDC report that as of the end of November 2022, so fall of 2022, 96.4% of Americans had antibodies to COVID-19. These are called anti-spike antibodies, so it's either from vaccination, infection, or both. So with that degree of immunity, we're going to see cases. We are, as subvariants come along. But hopefully what we're doing is keeping the amount of severe disease low. And the way to do that, and this is really important, is those who are still at risk for severe disease, which are mostly elderly and people on immunosuppressants. They're the ones we have to watch out for. They're the ones that we have to boost regularly with another vaccine dose, and also use treatments like Paxlovid if necessary. One thing about the boosting is someday we're going to get to a seasonal once-a-year boosting for older people, but while we're still settling into that seasonality, it's likely that we're going to encourage older people to get boosted when there's a surge.
Right, and before we delve into vaccination and boosting, of course, Dr. Dan, how do you explain this latest rebound in COVID-19 cases here on the local front?
Right. So when we want to explain the epidemiology of what's going on with an infectious disease, we usually look at what's going on with the virus, what's going on with the environment, and what's going on with the host. So in terms of the virus, as Dr. Gandhi mentioned, the dominant strain around the world, certainly in South Korea and the U.S., is XBB.1.16. Also in South Korea, there's XBB.1.9.1 and XBB.1.9.2. In terms of the 1.16 subvariant of Omicron, the WHO has characterized this subvariant as having antibody escape properties, having a growth advantage compared to other subvariants. And fortunately, though, in terms of severity and clinical significance, it does not seem to be causing more severe disease compared to other Omicron subvariants. So what this means is we should expect breakthrough infections and reinfections, and that's certainly what we're seeing in South Korea right now. In terms of the environment, as was mentioned earlier in the broadcast, South Korea has been seeing alternating heat waves with torrential rains, and this is all pushing people indoors for their activities. South Korea, especially the Seoul metropolitan area, remains a very crowded environment, especially the subways, long-term care facilities. Many of them still have multiple patients per room, so that makes it very easy for viruses, respiratory viruses, to spread. We call that nosocomially, so within a hospital or healthcare setting. And so this is the environment that sort of promotes the spread of respiratory viruses. And then in terms of the host, the bivalent booster uptake rate among people who are age 60 and above is really only about 34.5%. And for the entire adult population, everyone 18 and above, it's half that. It's 15.6%. So people's immunity is definitely waning right now, and that makes people vulnerable to getting reinfected if they've had COVID in the past, or if they had the bivalent booster and it's been several months and their immunity levels against infection are low right now. And so that's why I think that's one of the factors why we're seeing this surge. And then, of course, host behavior. So everyone is doing everything that they had waited to do that they couldn't do during the pandemic. So they're gathering, weddings, parties, celebrations, traveling. This is all happening at full tilt. And of course, these kinds of activities can set up for surges. They can be super spreader events. And so I think there's a good explanation in terms of what's going on right now.
Right. And Professor Gandhi, would you also say that public activity is to blame perhaps for the resurgence there in the US?
Well, it's true that we're back to normal here in the U.S. as well. I think that it's very rare for people to be wearing masks indoors. Some do. And I think that, you know, the pandemic was declared over by the World Health Organization on May 5th, 2023, and the U.S. declared the end of the public health emergency on May 11th, 2023. And that wasn't premature. That was really the pandemic phase. What is a pandemic phase of a virus? It's when things are difficult in terms of hospitalizations. There's an increase in respiratory deaths above the respiratory virus deaths above the normal. We are now back in the U.S., back to the same rate of mortality from respiratory viruses that we were prior to the pandemic. And that is good news. That means that the virus, COVID-19, has settled into one of many respiratory viruses that affect human populations, but we're out of the pandemic phase, and what we're into is the endemic phase. And what do we do in the endemic or the control phase? We figure out ways to keep those who are more vulnerable to severe disease safe. But the world is not going to go back to restrictions and to capacity limits and to indoor masking. It's not going to happen. And the pandemic being declared over was a very deliberate move by the World Health Organization to say we're going to have to live with this virus.
Right. Dr. Dan, moving ahead though, do you suppose the rebound here in Korea is a cause for concern for people like me who have yet to have contracted COVID-19, do you think?
Well, I'm assuming, since I've been working with you for the last 3 years during the pandemic, that you're healthy. So for a person who's young and healthy, especially if you're up to date on your COVID vaccinations, I don't think it's a cause for concern. But if you are elderly, if you're chronically ill, or if you live or work with people in that high-risk category, then there might be a cause for concern, because COVID, even though the overall risk for hospitalization, for severe disease and death is much lower now than it used to be, of course, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it still remains a potentially fatal disease. We had 2 deaths among children, unfortunately, during the month of July. Another person in their 20s passed away just this last week. We are continuing to see deaths due to this disease, even among people who are young. And so I think, you know, the risk is low overall. If you're healthy and up to date on your vaccinations, especially for you, the risk is low, but it does remain a potentially fatal disease. And so if you are in that high-risk category, you should be cautious.
Right, I see. Professor Gandhi, you've clarified then that the prospects of a COVID-19 lockdown is relatively low now. That being said then, Professor Gandhi, what are the chances of yet another pandemic occurring and then leading to a lockdown worldwide?
Well, this is a great question. I hope we're not going to have another pandemic for 100 years. I mean, I will say, just to go back to what Dr. Don said, for people who are older, we were mentioning it, boosters and treatments. These are the biomedical advances we have to keep people safe who are still vulnerable from COVID-19. So vaccine boosters, whenever we get the XBB booster, which we will sometime soon, I think, that would be very important for those who are older. And then the same with using treatments for those who are at risk for severe disease. And that would be an outpatient treatment called Paxlovid. In terms of another pandemic, you know, we are at risk only because we're in this era of pandemic. In the era of pandemics, and that has to do with warming of the planet and also how we treat animals, which is not a good way to reduce the. I mean, we really should be reducing the risk of zoonotic illnesses. On the other hand, we are in an era also where biomedical advances are going to happen fast. We got the vaccine for COVID-19 on December 11th. Literally, the pandemic was declared on March 11th, 2020. Within that short of a time frame, we got a highly effective vaccine for COVID-19. So the mainstay of pandemic management is going to be the rapid development of vaccines. We do need trust. We need trust from people. I know in South Korea you have the trust. We don't have the trust in the U.S. as at high levels in terms of vaccine uptake. And in terms of a lockdown, I don't think the world is going to be as open to a lockdown as they were prior to this. I think there's a lot of there were other effects of lockdowns, including effects on children with school closures, effects of other medical care. And I think it's going to be more likely that a rapid rollout of a vaccine help keeping the vulnerable safe, whoever's vulnerable from that pandemic, because it may be children next time and it may be older people next time. It depends on who's the most vulnerable, keeping them safe. But massive worldwide lockdowns, unless it's like Ebola and it's as transmissible as COVID-19, I don't see that happening.
Right, hopefully not, of course. Dr. Dan, do you suppose, keeping in mind what Professor Gandhi has said, do you suppose health authorities here should seek to perhaps launch a broader COVID-19 vaccination campaign as this particular virus looks to become a seasonal reality?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
So, yes, I think we should revitalize our vaccination campaign. As I mentioned, for the highest risk group, people who are 60 and above, the bivalent vaccine uptake rate is only 34.5%. For people who are 18 years and above, it's half that. And so I think we do have more work to do in terms of getting people on board to get the bivalent booster. Even now, because it will be at least another 2 months before a XBB Omicron targeted booster is available. So I think we do need to do more work. Also, I think it's time to prepare and optimize for when that XBB targeted booster does become available. I think we need to do a better job with communication, with making the vaccine available, accessible, and just convincing people that getting this booster, if you are elderly, high risk, immunocompromised, that this will add to your degree of protection against COVID-19. COVID-19 is not going to go away. As Dr. Gandhi said, this is endemic. And so this is something that we need to do. It's not the pandemic is over, we don't need to worry about it. That's not the attitude that's appropriate for COVID-19, and the attitude towards vaccinations needs to be, let's stay on top of the game season after season.
Right, and staying with vaccines, Professor Gandhi, I understand new COVID-19 vaccines will be available in the U.S. this autumn, but already pundits there believe the uptake will be low. Could you tell us a bit about the new vaccines and the reason behind the dull prospects?
Well, so the vaccine that's being encouraged by the WHO and the FDA has committed to will be the XBB 1.16 subvariant in the mRNA formulation of the vaccine. Now, 11.4% of our subvariants in the U.S. are already something called EB5. So the the virus does change quickly, but hopefully XBB 1.16 will still be the dominant strain by the time we get that new vaccine in the fall. In terms of the uptake, it's true that we also had a low uptake of the bivalent, lower than you had in the U.S. In South Korea, we had a lower uptake of the bivalent. It was actually in the 20s%. But I think if we focus our campaign, like the World Health Organization has encouraged us to do so as of March 28, 2023, through their SAGE guidance, if we focus our campaign on those who are older, over 65, those who are on immunosuppressants, those with multiple comorbidities, that focused campaign of those populations needing the next booster will hopefully increase our uptake in the populations that need it most. I think telling the entire planet to get a booster in fall is not going to fly, and that's not at all what the WHO is recommending anyway. So I hope the US will focus their campaigning on those populations most at risk.
Right. Meanwhile, staying with COVID-19, we're moving beyond the current resurgence. Dr. Dan, new studies reportedly link a person's genes to his or her experience with COVID-19. Could you explain this for us?
Right. So there were two studies recently published that shed some light on the mysteries of who gets asymptomatic infection. So who gets COVID-19 infection but has no symptom, because that has been a mystery. And also who develops long COVID. We know that there may be some risk factors, but these studies really shed some light in terms of what's going on a genetic basis to explain these conditions and these phenomena. So one of the studies looked at people who were bone marrow donors, and that was the registry that was looked at. And what they found was there is a specific gene called HLA-B1501. And people who have this gene seem to have a higher chance of having asymptomatic infection, that this gene seems to mediate asymptomatic infection. And this is very interesting because, of course, up until this point, it was somewhat of a mystery. The other study shed light on who is more likely to develop long COVID symptoms. And the gene that was identified is called, the gene's near a region called FOXP4. And what the researchers found is people who carry this version of the genes, they have a 60% higher odds for developing long COVID symptoms. And so I think these kinds of study findings will inform us in terms of where we should target our, say, vaccine development efforts, how we can manage and triage our patient care, and in terms of advising patient populations, how they can manage the disease going forward. Perhaps we can also use this information to develop new treatments for COVID-19 as well, especially with long COVID, because millions of people are still dealing with long COVID symptoms around the world. And so I think this is very interesting studies and findings that were recently reported. Of course, this is all very new and we need validation, and it's probably going to take many more months, maybe years, to actually develop some hard treatments and vaccines as a result of these studies, but it's very interesting indeed.
Right, I see, of course. Dr. Gandhi, Dr. Dan just mentioned long COVID. Now, a UK study has reportedly compared brain fog of long COVID to aging a decade. What more can you tell us?
So a couple of things about long COVID and the neurologic effects. I mean, one thing is that it seems that having lingering symptoms from COVID is really more common after severe COVID. And that observational study after observational study has shown that our rate of severe COVID has gone down with both vaccinations and infection-induced immunity, and hopefully with treatments and having more treatments available. So hopefully we're going to see the prevalence of the condition go down. In terms of the cognitive issues that happen with long COVID, it's still unclear what's going on because an RNA virus does not stay actively replicating in the body for long after the immune system swoops in and starts killing that virus. What can stay in the body are what are called retroviruses, like HIV, or even DNA viruses, like herpes DNA viruses that establish latency. And so we still have to figure out what are all the treatments to help people with these conditions. And the NIH just launched today a series of trials. This just happened today for anyone who has lingering COVID symptoms. Please, at least here in the U.S., get involved with these NIH studies to explore a variety of treatments that could help combat these symptoms. One is Paxlovid. One is metformin, which is in this capacity, serving as an anti-inflammatory. And others are cognitive therapies or helping people through some of the difficulty with what's happening just through therapy and cognitive therapy and talking. So it's really important to get involved if you're in this condition in one of these studies if you can.
Right, of course. Thank you for letting us know. Meanwhile, Dr. Dan, one final question to you, a brief one. What are your words of advice to those who test positive this summer, which is also said to be the hottest on record?
Right. So first, don't panic if you test positive. I would call your closest community health center or 1339 and ask for advice. You can let the person who's answering the phone know, what's your age? Do you have underlying comorbidities? And they can advise you in terms of should you start treatment? Should you start Paxlovid? In terms of respiratory etiquette, preventing the spread, if you do test positive, I would stay home. Don't go to school. Don't go to work, at least while you're infectious or if you have symptoms. And also, if you are very sick, there is a treatment called sotrovimab, which does still work against the XBB.1.16 subvariant. People who are very, very sick who cannot take Paxlovid for whatever reason, they may be eligible to get sotrovimab. So there are treatment options, but we do need to still be responsible and try to do what we can to prevent the illness from spreading, even if you don't have symptoms.
Right. Good to know, Dr. Dan. 1339 for those of us here in South Korea then, right?
Yes.
All right, then thank you very much, Dr. Dan, for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Gandhi, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, on that note, we end this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow. That is Wednesday.
I'm Yasmin Danila Amerswet, the ambassador of the Republic of Rwanda to the Republic of Korea. Since I've been in Korea, I've heard and learned a lot from Arirang TV, and I'm very thankful. Arirang TV has been a very good media diplomacy partner, and I've learned a lot through the content and the programs. Korea has been shining, and I've been having this feeling and this perception thanks to the content and the work of Arirang TV. I look forward to see Arirang TV continue to take the lead in this Korean, in giving the world Korean information about the culture, the IT information, and everything surrounded it, resonating with the world. Arirang.
So, you want a special experience? What? Travel? Meet K-pop stars? Wow! Okay, tell me, who do you like? Of course I know them. Here's a tip. You can travel and meet K-pop stars. What? You don't trust me? Who do you take me for? Okay, come close. Closer. Simply K-pop.
K-pop contour.
No need to thank me. Oh, you're watching Simply K-pop Contour. You're watching Arirang.
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world. Like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city. Transforming our world, navigating toward a better future.